Hi, my name is Lauren Vorderkins, and my research paper was called Out of Sight, Out of Mind, and it basically deals with the various issues revolving around outsourcing and some potential solutions for that. So you may have heard of outsourcing in a more negative light, such as with sweatshops, which is all the more reason why companies need to be very cautious and more aware of outsourcing issues so they don't fall into those traps. Outsourcing needs to have strict management and constant communication feedback between the host company and the outsourcing company in order for it to be a successful venture. Outsourcing has become more popular over the years simply because it is very cost saving. And outsourcing is basically when one company allows another company to manage production or some type of services for their company. This could be manufacturing car parts, it could be 24/7 customer service, or it could be ITS support. In 2003, a survey distributed by Business Communication Review found that 35% of their clients outsourced networking operations or managed services. So we see the prevalence of outsourcing, but now we need to talk about the different issues in outsourcing. Human resources can be one of the main issues simply because if a company decides to outsource a service such as ITS support, then they need to be aware that the outsourcing company needs resources such as telephones, computers, software. They need someone to do payroll. They need translators, especially if it's offshore. Those could be issues that companies may not be aware of initially, and then it adds to their cost and they're not saving as much because they didn't prepare for it. And another issue with outsourcing is that Americans feel that outsourcing takes away from the availability of U.S. jobs. Columbia University and Yale University economic researchers stated that an Associated Press Ipsos poll of May 2004 found that 69% of Americans thought that outsourcing hurts the U.S. economy. But there are other researchers out there who say that outsourcing actually helps the global economy. So you're kind of looking at it from two different angles, global economy and the U.S. economy. So companies are aware of this and they try to assess whether or not they can keep production in-house. In fact, a professor at Texas A&M University has created a framework or a type of chart that companies can look at and assess whether or not they can stay in-house or if it would be best for them to go ahead and outsource. But when a company does outsource, especially offshore, sometimes there are communication issues. There are communication barriers, and sometimes that happens to exacerbate certain problems. For instance, language researchers Morgan and Ramathian in 2008 did studies over some Indian call centers, and they found that many of the employees at the Indian call centers had to know and understand English. And the employees who did know and understand English would lord that over the employees who did not. So it exacerbated the caste system there, and the employees who knew English felt like they were a higher ranking than employees who didn't. But they also found that the employees at the Indian call centers had this perception of what they thought Western speech was. And when they would communicate with Westerners, the Westerners felt that the dialogue was very scripted, it felt unnatural, it almost felt very deceptive. So that's something that companies need to be aware of whenever they decide to outsource. But sometimes companies will outsource project management or research and development, sometimes some innovation basically. And Kennesaw State University researchers explain that project management can be very challenging, especially if you decide to offshore it. And the authors at Kennesaw State University in their literature, they caution that this increases the chances of failure when you decide to do that. But this is something that very large businesses will do sometimes in order to save money. So we may look at it and see, okay, large corporations have the ability to save, which gives them an edge over their competitors. So this just leaves small businesses behind. There's just no way that they can catch up. But that's not necessarily true. Small businesses can still utilize outsourcing by outsourcing specific types of functions, such as the time-consuming functions like website management. By allowing small businesses to outsource in this way, it will give them an edge over their competitors as well. And it's not just benefiting large corporate businesses. But whether you're a small business or a large business, legal issues are very prominent in outsourcing because there are service agreements between the host company and the outsourcing company. Within the service agreement, usually it stipulates when a product needs to be finished, so a deadline. These are often very hard to assess. So if a company has given the outsourcing company a specific deadline and then decides that they need the product sooner than that, the likelihood of the outsourcing company to move the deadline up is very small. A lot of times they will say no, and then that leaves the host company trying to figure out what they need to do, and they may actually lose money by having the deadline not met to their needs. But then also times there are termination agreements as well. So both parties, the outsourcing party and the host company, can terminate the agreement. And when termination happens, there can be costs involved. So the host company may owe the outsourcing company money, or the outsourcing company may need to deliver resources such as computers and phones back to the host company. So there's an exchange there. When companies decide to outsource, they need to make sure that they have extremely competent legal advice before they sign any contracts. But aside from legal issues, there can also be ethical issues. There are many pharmaceutical companies that outsource, and it's not a method of scapegoat. You can't say that because you were outsourcing, you didn't know that that product was fallible. You are liable regardless. Simply because you have signed a contract doesn't mean that the outsourcing company takes full responsibility for the service. The host company also has the responsibility to do due diligence and make sure that the products and services meet ethical standards both globally and locally. But aside from ethical issues, there are still security issues. Even if a breach occurs at an outsourcing company, it is likely that the host company will still be liable. Security issues often involve privacy and data. People take their privacy very seriously. So if data is lost or stolen, it becomes a very great issue for the company and their clients as well. The best way to handle this type of situation is to have some sort of policies in place for security, some communication feedback between the host company and the outsourcing company on how data is being stored, saved, used, and if it's not being used anymore, how is it being destroyed? Even with all of these issues revolving around outsourcing, it is still a great business decision because it can save a lot of money. And if you look at it from a global economy standpoint, it kind of spreads the wealth in a way. However, I was unable to research further into the socioeconomic class in other countries, so the status, such as mentioned with the Indian call center. And I also believe that there's potential outsourcing development and structure for other countries, especially in Africa and South America. But that just needs further research. When a company decides to outsource, it does not necessarily mean out of sight, out of mind. In fact, it's the exact opposite. Outsourcing requires more hands-on, strict management and policies, along with constant communication feedback between the host company and the outsourcing company if they want it to be a successful business venture. If you have any questions about outsourcing, please feel free to email me at lmvorderkens@liberty.edu. Thank you for allowing me to share the information that I found during my research and in my paper. I hope you have a wonderful day.